What's up, guys? So I want to do a quick follow-up with yesterday's case study. This is probably the last free one I'll do. I don't know, like till like next month. We'll see. But yeah, I was getting some complaints as well with the whole like I guess I get frame rates that drop here and there. And I think I'm pretty sure it is a it was my resolution. I don't think it's the Zoom app because I do have it to where it's kind of recording at at a pretty decent or at high output. I don't know. I guess it's a setting. I don't know, but it optimizes for video sharing, and I don't have like a bad computer, so I think it's my resolution, my text being a bit too small, and that's just something I've always had for like a while. So I think um I think that that's the issue, and so I'm going to like I just made all of my text bigger. It should look a little bigger than it is compared to yesterday's video. So hopefully the frame rate doesn't mess up or I don't drop any frames, right? So let me know what you guys think about that. If not, I'm just gonna have to start looking for other apps outside of Zoom for screen recording and then for video conferencing, because I have been with Zoom for like years, but I don't know if they like I try to ask them to solve this and they can't. So whatever, like I'll just find someone else. But yeah, let's go ahead and follow up on what we talked about yesterday. This was like the AU trade that we talked about yesterday. That's already been covered. We were talking about this yesterday as well, but this is like pretty much the only real swing setup that I see for like the long term. And by long term, I mean like 2, 3 weeks. That is nowhere near our entry, but we have transitioned to be bullish. So because we transitioned to be bullish, why do I say we've transitioned to be bullish? We are bearish, right? We potentially have a CBOS incoming there. It's not fully complete yet, but we did have a kind of triangle slash range. So because we had a triangle slash range, right, we're kind of seeing this breakout with some momentum. Momentum equals big candles, right? And so we're seeing that come into play right now. And so therefore, this is bullish. So because this is bullish, that means that if we are to come here, then I need some type of transition to justify lower. I can't just see this. I'm not just going to try to sell, right? Like I need, because this internal is bullish, let's say we have one leg, two leg, even if we have something like that, I would rather see something like this, a second failure, meaning an internal failure on top of an external, either CBOS or any type of unwillingness here if this high was to be higher, right? To then justify that swing setup. But let's go ahead and talk about UJ. UJ, very interesting. So you guys remember what we said yesterday, where I was kind of still anticipating this to be bullish, even though I wanted to pitch the sell, right? And I ended up taking a small short here. I'll go ahead and show you guys this. The consensus of the trade was, right, if we are to come up into this POI and we are to see a reaction, then we can justify a move. And therefore, if that move is to break this substantially, then we can technically have a transition and this would give us the full move to the downside, right? That was kind of like the pitch, right? And but obviously we were like around here, so we needed this to go higher. So we ended up having an internal reaction here. Based on that internal reaction, solidified low, came into the high, right? Based on microstructure, we can very clearly see there is one final push to the upside. So this is a CBOS in terms of this range, but we are within a POI, and because we have a reaction from the POI, that being the CBOS, right? That is kind of like the starting point as to when I should look for a reaction. And the only other convictions that came from this were two things: momentum and closures. You guys know I really like those 3-pin patterns I told you about, and I'll show you guys where that was here in a bit. It didn't pop up on the screen, but we can see here very low momentum going to the upside. Then we have big momentum into the downside. And you guys can see that this is kind of struggling to push up. But once we break through here, right, we're seeing some type of momentum. And that momentum is probably the telltale sign as to why we'll get a good closure, which is why we will support the idea of taking a reaction based on the POI. So the reaction of the POI is only the start because you guys know a reaction doesn't mean follow through, but the conviction came from the momentum and the daily closure. I mean daily closure, hour closure, sorry, which is here. As you can see, we have this closure here. So as soon as my entry had like executed, which my entry was I believe wrong one, we'll come back to this one. It was I believe a bit after, yeah, it was we were just about to close that hourly candle, and then that's the candle that I'm referencing here. So anticipating that closure to close in that way, my position is to use, originally it could have been here, right? The turbulence point, SL at the invalidation. Why SL at the invalidation? Because if this is to, let's say, break, right, substantially, then I have to be bullish because we're breaking through the POI, right? And then the only way for that to be considered a sweep then would be either a transition, right, or a full break, right? So that would mean that the sell side, I mean, the sell scenario is just not viable. But right now it is viable because of the reasons we stated. And I took my position from the open with my SL at the invalidation. And from there, this is why I tell you guys it's very important to, or why I'm really leaning towards taking some type of partial, because I took my initial partial here, right? So from, this is my execution here. We ended up hitting the turbulence point again, and then we fell into the first TP. I took my first trailed stop here. I mean, my first trailed stop, my first partial here, with my stop losses being moved a bit above break even. I actually just posted these. Oops, don't need to post. Wrong one. Right, this is I just posted this in the public chat right now. Right, that took my first partial, and then that ended up breaking me even. Right, and then this is the second position we'll talk about here in a bit. Anyways, the consensus was I took my partial here, and because we broke that final leg, then if we are to reach my break even, aka any type of invalidation, which would also probably be here, right? Because this would then pretty much be an LGC that supports that bullish move, which was the original reason why we weren't too keen on taking this position to begin with, right? If you guys recall from yesterday. So position was good, entry was good, reaction was good. We were just from a biased POV wrong externally, and that's okay. That's why we take our partials. That's why we move our stop losses, so we can move on. And either way, I can play in hindsight and be like, yeah, it was a hedge with the dollar, and I was looking at EU sells, and if I'm selling EU and UJ, then realistically one should win, but no, that's not really the point. I come into the markets without a bias, and I develop a bias based on the reactions present and the current multi-level structure, multi-level order flow, etc. Right? And if I have a sell on UJ and a sell on EU, even if they are inversely correlated, I do not care. Right? Because maybe one will win, one will not, but I'm trading based on my convictions and my setups, not necessarily based on correlations, even though correlations can play into biases and executions, right? But if I see the setup, I'm going to take conviction. I see conviction in the setup, then I'm going to take the setup, right? But yeah, this ended up continuing the initial low, high, retracement, CBOS, and that's continuing higher. So even if you didn't catch a sell, you could see this as OFD, and this could have been a decent scenario for you to take higher, right? So that's that, and I believe we have news here in a bit, so we'll see how that reacts right now. But while that happens, I believe we do. No, I don't think we do. Anyways, um, EU. This is the other scenario we talked about yesterday. This one, I actually just left the limit overnight and kind of just let it run. Like I wanted to head to bed, so you guys know that we were looking at potentially a sweep, internal sweep, break. So if we were to have a reaction here or a transition, that would be a high probability setup. But I'm just not trying to wait till like 2 in the morning. So I will leave my limit, SL and invalidation. And if it hits, it hits. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. The only thing that I say I compromised on was the entry itself. I didn't use the entire buy to sell. I used a refined buy to sell. And what do I mean by refined buy to sell? Is because this is the actual internal leg that led into the break, which then led into the opposing break of structure. That's where my supply zone is coming from. Right. And So rather than waiting for the reaction, which luckily enough, I didn't actually even, you didn't even get a reaction, right? You kind of just melted from there. I don't even think there was a position in New York, right? There was no position in New York either. So lucky me, I guess. Anyways, setup very, very straightforward. We're looking at this be bearish, right? We're seeing this as a CBOS, which is what solidifies the entire range, right? And because we're seeing the LGC here, I can articulate this LGC as a type of um sweep range. So if we have a sweep range LGC, then it only makes sense for this to continue lower, right? At least in the current scheme of things. If we were to, let's say, react here and then go higher, okay, that's a different story. Then now we have to actually wait for the transition in order to even justify a bearish bias. But but yeah, guys, this is currently in play. We'll see how this plays out for the week. And other than that, there isn't too much else to anticipate, right? We're anticipating dollar to continue higher. Um, and because we're anticipating dollar to continue higher, then that would support the bias here because I'm anticipating this low to be ran. And yeah, I definitely see this to be ran, and then maybe it could just like consolidate for the rest of the week, and then let's say that would be the catalyst that brings us into UCAD from a dollar POV, and then see where that goes from there. But yeah, other than that, guys, I'll see you guys in the next one. Let me know what the quality is like, and if not, I'll just have to start looking for a new app. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.